Hey everyone. I'm making this in response to a question I got from a student asking what are the benefits or pros and cons, if you will, of adding a fragment to a container to its parent at design time, where we set the attribute of a fragment container view to specify the fragment that should be displayed there, versus at runtime, where we write code to create a fragment transaction that attaches the fragment to the parent. Um, and the answer to that is a very unsatisfying it depends. Uh, for better or worse, that's the reality. And what I mean there is it boils down to the characteristics of the specific problem you're trying to solve with fragments, or the role of the fragment. Let's use that phrasing in your application. And first, let's create a distinction, if you will. It is almost always safe in that you're not going to run into issues if you attach a fragment at runtime. If you write code to attach your fragment, you will almost always be safe. Or at least I cannot conceive of a circumstance where that would not allow you to get the results you're looking for. Whereas attaching at design time may come with certain caveats in certain instances that might require that you write the logic of your activity of your fragment. I'm so sorry, in a certain way, especially making sure that there is no dependence on certain types of data when it starts up. That could only be provisioned when you write code to create the fragment. So let's put that aside for now and just look at, well, when would it be appropriate to do one versus the other. And I think a simple rule of thumb, if we even want to frame it that way, is if you have a simple, putting it in quotes, the simplistic, the line that you draw between simple and complex is not necessarily clear. But if you have a simple fragment that once attached doesn't move, it's not dynamic in any way, it's not going to be manipulated transactionally, being removed or anything else, and or it is always going to be present in the same container for the life of the application, then that fragment might be a candidate for attaching at design time, where again we specify the property. Um, Whereas if that is not the case, if a fragment's presence in a specific container is dependent on the state of the application, something has to happen, then that's a perfect candidate for a runtime attachment. So I would write code to create a transaction to add that fragment. Right? So that's not a hard and fast rule, and it's not even necessarily one that would make sense outside of a specific problem description. So it really boils down to you thinking through how you want your fragments to be used based on how they're designed, what their roles are, and when that role or feature or function would make sense in your application based on the current state, based on what the user is doing. But again, it's really just thinking through those steps. So what we can do is uh, think through the process based on what we're trying to accomplish. So, for example, I mean, by way of demonstration, so here we have a simple fragment that doesn't do anything other than it has a layout where we made the layout a nice bright red or whatever color this is. And it basically boils down to if I have, if I want to add a layout, they've changed this so much. Here we go. All right. If I want to add a layout, a fragment container view to the layout of my activity, so that's what I'm doing here. It asks me, okay, do you want to select which fragment do you want to attach here? So I say blank fragment. And so this is adding it at design time. This a fragment instance or an instance of blank fragment is going to be added to my activities layout automatically when this application runs. And that's perfectly fine. You should get a nice little preview here. I guess they've fixed that, or at least it would complain and throw an error because it's not, because I have not specified the preview property. But that's fine. So we would see the fragment here. Let's see if I can actually get it. If I can remember the. No, I cannot. And now we should see it. No, we're not seeing it. Okay, I got it wrong. Either way. Here we go. I thought I did that. What did I type? Oh, tools layout. Oh, my fault. Okay. Yeah, so it's just a preview for Android Studio. So that's why it's tools. Okay. All right. So this is the design time view. This is what it looks like. And the idea here is that this is sufficient if this fragment is always supposed to be here. If we don't have any reason to add it later on, if adding this fragment is the first line we're going to have in our code and it never changes, then it's perfectly fine to just add it at design time. However, if the adding of this fragment, and again, here you can see where it's specified. It's in the attributes for this fragment container view. Here we see Android name, and we reference the class for the fragment. So that's how it's added. Now, again, we could remove that. We don't have to remove this. This has no impact whether we remove it or not. If we leave it there, it'll just show up as if it's still present, even though it's not. But then in our code for our activity, we can now specify that, hey, we want to add this as a transaction. I want to add in whatever the fragment is called, fragment container view 2. And I want to add an instance of blank fragment. Always commit, make sure you remember to commit. So this is now adding the fragment at design time. And this would make sense, again, just as a general rule of thumb, if adding this instance to your activity was conditional in some way. So if something were the case and I wanted to add this fragment, then adding it at runtime is the only option I have. Else, whatever. Because I cannot put this condition in my layout. So this is the opportunity I have to do it. If this needs to be added based on some condition or as a result of some event, so user clicking a button, for example, it results in the fragment being added, then yeah, design time. Because its presence or absence is dynamically determined based on the state of the application versus its presence being continuous throughout the life of the application, which again, in that scenario, having it added at design time via the adding the property here would make sense. And what you may come to realize is that applications themselves might be more dynamic than this simple black and white. What you might have is a scenario where, sure, you start with a fragment added as a property, but that very same container may still have other fragments added or removed. That is absolutely possible. Or you may have an activity or a parent that has numerous fragment container views where some are added at design time and others are added at runtime. Again, based on that sort of vague rule that says if the fragment has nothing dynamic about its presence, then you can probably add it at design time. The caveat being what we mentioned at the beginning, which is based on the fragment's design, can it be added at runtime? Because that rule undercuts everything else. If the fragment needs, for example, information to be given to it before it is started, and you try to attach that fragment at design time, it may not work. It may crash even, depending on how the fragment is designed. And you may have to do it at runtime. You may have no choice. On the other hand, if the fragment is written to sort of protect itself, if the data it needs is not available, such as it might be dependent on view models, that's something we talk about later, or it or it simply verifies that data is available or not available, then you're probably safe to do it, whichever way you choose. What was I saying? Right. So you may have that scenario where some are added at design time, some are added at runtime. But it really boils down to the problem you're trying to solve. It's not hard and fast. There are no fixed guidelines about how and when you can achieve that. So I hope that helps. As always, as almost always is the case when it comes to programming, the answer is it depends. All right. Let me know if you have any other questions.